Well, I'm here in Düsseldorf, where I've been talking for Axalta on the future of the auto industry to around 350 people. The first thing is to say is that when you look at the outer edge of the radar screen, all kinds of extraordinary things are happening in this sector, and many of them are linked to the most important word which helps to drive the future, which is of course emotion. It's the passions that people have. Can you imagine the owner of this wonderful car, or this one here, he parks it in a car park, goes out back to the car after going shopping and finds that someone has gone along the side of the entire car with a key and gone straight down the bodywork. Now, what kind of emotion do you imagine that owner will feel? Now, if you think about it, the bodywork can be repaired, it'll be covered by insurance, and yes, there will be an inconvenience of swapping out the car, but it's not a disaster. But I guarantee that the sense of personal outrage, of violation, of general anger about what's happened will be quite intense. Why is that? Because people get very emotionally attached to their cars. You know, trust is a very important word. It's linked to emotion, and it's certainly linked to the auto industry. You have to have trust in the car, the manufacturer, trust that the brakes work, trust that the engine will be reliable, trust that the spares won't be too expensive when they need to be done, trust in the dealer network that they tell the truth about what's wrong with the vehicle when you take it in. Trust is very, very important. And so is the issue of timing in the auto industry. We need a lesson from the world of the web. If you think about how incredibly impatient our world's getting, it's extraordinary. And I'm not just meaning people wanting to drive faster or wait shorter time for traffic lights and things. It's general impatience. Imagine that you are watching Britney Spears one night on an iPad, and you're on the phone and you're doing your emails at the same time, and I don't know, and you want to check her birth date, and you type her name into Google, press on her webpage. How many seconds will you wait before you press the back button? Because just life's too short to wait for Britney Spears' birthday. Polling here in Düsseldorf over 350 experts on the auto industry, I find exactly the same result as everywhere else in the world. After about 5 seconds, people press the back button. Why? Because 5 seconds is like a million years. After 4 seconds, one's irritated. After 5 seconds, we've lost the will to live. And this feeling of impatience is intense, it's growing, and it affects everything in the auto industry. It affects how long we expect to wait for a part to come. It affects how tolerant we are about a 3-day wait for a body shop repair after an accident. It affects how long we're prepared to wait for a customized car to come off the assembly line and be delivered to our homes. Now, demographics is the #1 driver when it comes to the mega trends around the auto industry. Why is that? 1 billion children alive today, all of them will want to drive their own vehicle in the next 30 years. 1 billion people will move from rural areas to smaller towns and cities, and then from bigger towns and cities to other towns and cities over the next 30 years. And they'll be moving to places where they expect to drive once they get there. That's what their dream will be. And if we look at the number of vehicles per 100 in the population of America, say, or Australia, or in Europe, you can see there in dark green, it's very different from the light green parts of the world. In fact, if you look at the future, it would require 4 times as many cars to be used in the world today for the average country to find themselves with a car ownership the same as America. And this is going to involve a gigantic increase in scale of manufacturing and consolidation, because it requires such immense amount of research to get a new model made of an engine or of a kind of a battery power system or whatever it is. And that's why, for example, VW has one platform on which it's building 1 million cars, many, many different models, because it's too expensive to build 2 platforms. At the same time, we're seeing changes in the supply chain, how these cars are put together. It used to be global, and that's becoming regional. So Vietnam and Malaysia, Singapore, contributing parts to a Chinese car built in China to be sold probably in China. In the past, exported to the United States. Meanwhile, the United States cars which are going to be sold there maybe being built in Mexico, with many parts supplied from across the border from the US itself. We call it the near-shoring boom. Now, and when you look at what's going on inside the factories, we're seeing tremendous change. So, for example, we're seeing much lighter materials, and the new Range Rover is 40% lighter than the one before. We're seeing nanotech coatings in just about every moving metal part, because it saves 5% of energy immediately you do it at almost zero cost. And these atomic single particle, single layer of atom coatings, when you put those same single layer atom coatings on the outer surface of cars, then you get self-cleaning cars, you get cars which repel water and dust and grime and oil much more rapidly than before. You get new kinds of properties in the car paints, and this connects with other things to do with technologies that self-heal, so that when you scratch the membrane of a car, the paint membrane, it releases all kinds of chemicals which allow that joint to be fused together again, and that paint repair to be automatic, not on scratches as large as these may be, but certainly in others. And we're also seeing dynamic paints which change their property according to temperature or environment or humidity, to excite the interest of the consumer or perhaps for other reasons. We're seeing changes in headlights, laser headlights with 500 meter distance. We're seeing new safety measures, things like external airbags being experimented with. We're seeing huge changes in the truck industry, things like shock absorbers which generate power for the refrigeration pack at the back. New aerodynamics, better designed wheels, tires which don't absorb so much energy as they turn, engines which are hyper efficient. We're seeing changes in fuels, changes as we shift away from a petrol-dominated car world or even a diesel-dominated car world. Quite frankly, burning food in vehicles seems a really crazy idea. 30% of all grain in America is burnt in car engines now and in truck engines, yet we have a global food shortage. It's illegal now to drive in the European Union without burning up food to power 10% of the miles that you drive. So biofuels, I believe, is already a last century idea. It will be phased out. We have better things to do with food than burning them in vehicles. Let's look at other fuels instead. One of them is LPG. It's a highly efficient and clean. LPG, liquid petroleum gas, has revolutionized air quality in places like Delhi, where the Indian government ruled that no taxi and no coach and no bus could any longer burn diesel or petrol, and almost overnight the air quality improved. Hydrogen is much talked about as a fuel. I'm not so sure it's going to make it, but it's a nice idea to burn hydrogen, and you just get oxygen burning with it, and you get water out of the back of the engine. Very neat. You can use hydrogen in fuel cells and so on to make electricity, and you get a similar chemical reaction in terms of the end product. You get water. Now, one of the problems with it is the fuel source. You need pipelines stretching right across America and across Europe. It's difficult to manage as a gas. It has a lower calorific value, a lower energy content per kilogram than many other fuels, certainly in terms of volume. It's a difficult gas. I don't see the world going to install hydrogen pipelines across the entire universe to get hydrogen as an international fuel for vehicles when there's so many better alternatives. One of them is hybrids, of course, as batteries have got better, and we're seeing astonishing increases in the sales of hybrids. But the trouble with hybrids is you have to have two of everything. There's two engines, two power sources, and so on, when actually you only need one. And every time we're seeing a jump in efficiency of the hybrid, you're seeing petrol manufacturers hit back with their own petrol engines in petrol cars that are suddenly seeing a similar leap and getting very close to the hybrid in terms of efficiency. And you're seeing pure electric cars improving as well. And then you look at, for instance, at the GM Volt. Well, the GM Volt, even the earliest ones with only a range on the battery of about 35 to 40 miles, even their batteries are used 82% of the time. So if you put a better battery in that has, say, a range of 100 miles, you probably find that 95% of the time you're not using the petrol engine. Well, that's an awful lot of petrol engine to have and an awful lot of fuel to be carrying in the back, petrol or diesel or whatever you want, just for an extra 5 or 6 or 7% range. It just doesn't make much sense in the longer term when we think about the improvements in battery technology itself. And here Tesla is the number one leader in my view. Tesla has always said they're not into cars, their primary technology is batteries, and they're a software company. That's what they've said, and I believe they're right. The Tesla has led the way with 400 kilometer, 500 kilometer, and soon 600 kilometer range vehicles, and the price of batteries will continue to fall, despite what some people have said about running out of certain raw materials. But at the moment, sales of electric cars are still below what they were forecast 5 years ago, and we still have issues about how we're going to charge them, unless you've got a charging point. So some people have come up with ingenious ideas like here to coat the vehicle itself with photovoltaic cells. Trouble is, you need an awful lot of them. In fact, to be precise, you need 7 square meters of photovoltaic cells at current efficiency to produce 1 kilowatt of power, even in perfect conditions. So that's not enough to drive a car. So you're going to have to wait a while, you need a lot of sunlight, and remember, we haven't got very long to waste because our world's become very impatient. Now, the cars themselves in terms of design are changing relatively slowly. If you look over the last 50 years, well, cars still have 4 wheels. They still have a driver and passengers all facing the same direction. They're still loaded into the car in a very similar way to a plane or a bus or a train. Why is that? Well, here are the fundamental limitations. Number one is air. It's the physical properties of air hitting a rapidly moving object that's very low off the ground. And this means that every vehicle is designed and tested in a wind tunnel, and it has to conform to the same properties, which is why virtually all vehicles now have almost identical shape within their own genre in terms of the size, general size, and number of occupants in them. And it's the same for seats. There are only so many ways in which a human being can sit comfortably in a small space, especially when jammed up with other human beings. That means back to back rather than facing each other, for example. It's just a better use. That's why you have airline seats all facing the same way, coach seats facing the same way. And when it comes to the cockpit, we also have limitations. There's a limit to what the human brain can contain and absorb without crashing a car, unless you have a robot driving it, which I'll come to. So you can have the greatest cinematic type of complex you like, something out of science fiction, but it's not going to help a human being. You have to have a simple display ultimately that does the job. Now, that's where automation comes in, to make the decisions on behalf of the driver and to ensure all kinds of sensors to improve driver safety. And that could be detecting alcohol with your hand on the steering wheel, detecting whether you're going to have a heart attack with again, your hands on the steering wheel. It could be detecting if you're going to nod off with looking at your eyes as whether they're open or closed, and so on. And all of this is starting to get connected together by law. In fact, in places like the US and Canada, it's now becoming illegal to sell a car that isn't online all the time. Why? Because life's too short to have an offline car. And when you connect them together, well, all kinds of new worlds open. Number one is insurance. It means that we can have insurance which relates to how fast you drove last night on the way home. Insurance that detects how you drive on a motorway. Insurance that works out whether you drive a lot between 11 a.m. and 7 a.m. in the morning, which is when most accidents happen. Insurance that can see the exact speed at which you took the corner near your home last night. These things really matter, and in future we can expect biometric tests for a passenger as they get into the car to log who they are, so that their insurance premium can be safely calculated separately for different members of the family. Now, once you've got telematics, once you've got all these online vehicles, you can stitch them together and you get road trains, and there you get huge efficiencies. Up to 30% for tailgating, because you don't get the turbulence, you just go in the streamlined wind tunnel that's created by the vehicle that's ahead of you. And of course, if you get a train where only the front driver needs to stay awake, well, why not get rid of the front driver altogether and go for robots? Google, of course, has led the way on this, and they've already tested over 700,000 kilometers of robot miles with very few accidents. And here is a video showing you how the robot thinks. See, the robot's controlling the car. It's a conventional car with a steering wheel, and this is what the robot is seeing. The robot is scanning every object and categorizing it into risk, no risk, legal, illegal, and interpreting every single element in ways that are hopefully similar to the decisions that an ordinary human driver would make. Now, but do you need the driver? Do you need a steering wheel? No, you don't. So here is two passengers having fun in a vehicle which actually they can't control. Now, who's driving it? Who's in charge? Who needs to take the driving test? Well, no one. I mean, the idea of a driving test is such a last century idea when the robot can pass the driving test for you. That means a child could be driving the car. All they do is say where they want to go, and it's recognized through speech recognition. It means a blind man can drive a car, just says, "Take me home," and the robot takes him home. So a very different kind of world, but it raises questions about liability in the case of accident. And we're seeing new patterns of car ownership. For instance, if you look at student drivers, if you look, well, actually at young drivers, 20 to 30-year-olds in the US, we're seeing that the car ownership in this group has gone down 8% in 20 years. It's fallen 30% in the UK in the last 10 years. That's a huge change, and every manufacturer should be thinking about the rising generation of new car drivers and how they're going to do it. Answer, they're not going to have the cars parked outside their houses like they used to before. They're experimenting with different patterns, and the older generation are also following. The auto-leave type thing, a model in Paris where we rent by the hour just when you need. The Uber type environment where you rent by the second according to what you need. The last few times I've hired an Uber in London, it's taken me on average, I think, 120 seconds from pressing the button to having a named driver whose vehicle I recognise from the photograph on my side. And I've rated him, I've scored him on social media, he scores me too. I'll tell you, passengers that do something nasty, like they vomit in the back of a minicab twice, they'll never get an Uber again, and quite rightly so. And I know it's incredibly efficient, but it's changing models of ownership. And the big question then is, who owns the driver? It's no longer who owns the vehicle, but who owns the driver? Who owns the driver relationship? Or rather, who owns the person who wants to travel when there is no driver because there's a robot? The manufacturers want to own the driver. The telcos want to own the driver because they have all the telematics, people like Google, iPhone, and so on. The breakdown companies want to own the driver. The dealer networks want to own the driver. The independent small garages want to own the driver. The leasing company wants to own the driver, and so does the bank, and so does the software provider, and so does the insurance company. So all of these people battling for the relationship. Who owns the relationship will determine the future. And it's very, very important for the network around the world of small family-owned garages that have been providing a tremendous service. And of course, their job is becoming more difficult because the dealer networks really don't want them. The dealer networks are making it more and more difficult for these people to repair their vehicles with more and more specialist IT, more and more automated systems under the bonnet, so that you require a university degree and then a PhD and then a special training by the company to even understand how to begin to do a repair to that engine. So auto dealers and manufacturers aligning in big networks will continue to fight for control against all these other interest groups that want to take it from them. Ultimately, well, the individual is an individual. They may own the car, they may just rent it by the second, it doesn't really matter. But the future is going to be all about the experience, the customer experience, the emotions of actually owning a car. This car that actually turns out most people in the world talk to their cars. They get very upset about their cars. They feel that their cars are kind of personal. They keep stuff in their cars. It's about customer experience, customer emotion. It's about customer insight. It's about choice and speed and price in an increasingly mobile and complicated world.